Hello, dear friends. You are on the channel of Ruslan Bailov, and before you is another daily summary of combat operations from the Ukrainian front. Really good and, without exaggeration, important news arrived from the front today. The episode promises to be very intense and interesting, so I strongly recommend watching it until the very end. So that you immediately understand the scale of what is happening, I will announce the key figures right at the beginning. In one sector, Russian units advanced by 6.5 kilometers, in another by 5 kilometers, and in a third direction, the depth of the advance amounted to 7.5 kilometers. You must agree, the figures are impressive. Let us begin essentially with one of these pieces of news. It came from the zone of responsibility of the Vostok, East grouping. Here, Russian fighters managed to make a serious breakthrough deep into the defenses of the armed forces of Ukraine. Moreover, we are not talking about some local success, but about a truly powerful advancement. The maximum depth of this breakthrough reached 6.5 kilometers. However, in this case, what is far more important than the figures themselves, although they are certainly worthy of attention, is the result to which this breakthrough led. And the result was the establishment of full control over the settlement of Ternovatoe. And this is not just an unsubstantiated statement. Video footage has appeared, recording the presence of Russian flags at 15 different points in the village simultaneously. That is, effectively throughout all of Ternovatoe, footage was filmed where Russian fighters demonstrate flags. This unequivocally speaks to the full control over the settlement and the fact that it has been completely cleared. I want to note separately that the presentation of information by the fighters of the Vostok grouping traditionally leaves no room for doubt. I do not want to advise anyone on anything, but in my view it is precisely this format, with a multitude of objective control frames, that completely removes any questions. This is in contrast to situations where the capture of a settlement is announced, but not a single piece of supporting material is published. Here, however, the presented frames unequivocally testify to the fact that Ternovatoe is under the full control of Russian units. It is also important to emphasize that Ternovatoe is not just a village, but an urban-type settlement. Moreover, it represents an important logistical hub and a well-fortified point of the armed forces of Ukraine. It is enough to look at the map to see 4 motor roads converge at Ternovatoe at once, and railway tracks also pass through it. In general, the result of the fighters' work can be called excellent. Moreover, the Ukrainian command also perfectly understands the significance of Ternovatoe and realizes what consequences await them after such a failure. And so, in order to somehow overshadow this news, they undertook, to put it mildly, a strange attempt at informational compensation. An order was given to the fighters of the 110th Brigade to get on motorcycles, take a Ukrainian flag, and move anywhere toward Russian positions, plant the flag, film a video, and then declare a victory. Peremoga. I am not exaggerating. This was recorded in a radio intercept, where the command literally sounded, "Go anywhere." However, they did not manage to arrive. Russian drone operators destroyed all the motorcycles and all-terrain vehicles involved in this attempt. So that you better understand the degree of the Ukrainian side's detachment from reality, let us turn for a minute to their map, specifically to the deep state map. According to their version of events, the front line supposedly runs on the eastern bank of the Gaicha River and at some distance from it. And Ternovatoe, in their perception, is located deep in the rear. The distance from their line of combat contact to Ternovatoe exceeds 11 kilometers. In their reality, Nechaevka, Radostnoye, Novoye, Zaporizhzhia, Dobropolye, and of course Ternovatoe itself supposedly remain under their control. And against this background, 15 flags suddenly appear in an urban-type settlement, which, by their own version, is located far behind the front line. One could say that a very cold and quite unpleasant shower awaits them. Returning to our map, a logical question arises. In which direction will the Russian offensive develop next? In the near perspective, one can identify at least 2, or more precisely even 3 settlements from which positive news should be expected. These are Kristoforovka and Boykovo, located north and northwest of Ternovatoe. Such a development of events is quite expected, as it is necessary to secure the northern flank of the settlement and reduce the risks of possible counterattacks. and there is no doubt that the Ukrainian side will attempt to counterattack. As for Kristoforovka, Russian units had already entered there previously, as I informed you. However, at that time they did not manage to consolidate their positions. Now the situation has changed cardinally. Ternovatoe and Kristoforovka are separated by less than 1 kilometer, approximately 800 meters. Using Ternovatoe as a strongpoint with permanent structures, exerting pressure on Kristoforovka will be significantly easier than before. The third settlement, where a development of success can also be expected, is Pridorozhnoye, located further west, near Rozdestvenskoye. Furthermore, in the near future, we should expect the clearing of the entire territory up to the railway tracks. The minimum task is to reach and consolidate along the railway line. Beyond that, the situation becomes more complicated. A new line of defense begins, built along the line of the villages Verkhnyaya Tersa, Vozdvizhenka, Rozdestvenskoye, heading north. Overcoming this line will be a difficult task, as we are talking not just about dragon's teeth, but about a serious system of fortifications. However, when the Far Eastern units break through this line of defense as well, and I deliberately say when and not if, as I have no doubt about it, after that, for a distance of 12 to 13 kilometers, up to the Melnik-Nikolskoye line, there will be no more serious fortifications. And in this sector, the pace of the Vostok grouping's advance may significantly increase. Also, information was received today that the settlement of Sviatopetrovka in the Gulyaipol area has also passed under the control of Russian troops. The Vostok grouping presented objective control footage of the combat operations for this settlement. In this case, one can also confidently say that the village is under the full control of Russian units. It gives the impression that the Vostok grouping has accumulated sufficient strength and has begun an active offensive movement along the entire front line. If we take into account that over the last year in this direction, the Vostok grouping has advanced approximately 70 kilometers, then it is quite possible that by the end of the current year, Russian troops will either find themselves on the outskirts of Zaporizhzhia, or combat operations will already be conducted for Orekov. In any case, as Russian troops approach from the eastern direction, the Ukrainian command will be forced to devote more and more attention to this sector and transfer additional resources here. The loss of such a large city would be an extremely sensitive blow for Kiev, especially since another city with a population of over 1 million, Dnipro, is located not far from Zaporizhzhia. Moving on. Yesterday, the capture of Rechnoy was also announced. However, at the moment, objective control footage is absent. Therefore, we will not analyze this sector in detail for now. As soon as confirming materials appear, we will certainly return to it. In addition, news arrived yesterday about the transition of the village of Bereztok, located south of Konstantinovka, to Russian control. In this case, objective control footage is present. Despite the fact that the advancement itself may seem small in scale, its significance is extremely high. Ahead, the clearing of the so-called pocket to the east and the subsequent entry into the industrial zone of Konstantinovka is expected. Thus, pressure on the city will be exerted from yet another direction. We move to the Krasny Lyman direction. Here, changes have also been recorded regarding the eastern part of Krasny Lyman. Video materials were received from this area today, according to which Russian troops advanced toward Krasny Lyman from the eastern direction to a distance of up to 2 kilometers and occupied new positions near the Kirovsk-Krasny Lyman highway. The forward positions were subjected to shelling by the armed forces of Ukraine. However, in the end, the entire territory marked in red passed under the control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. It is possible that at the time of the video recording, the control zone was already significantly wider, as confirming materials, as a rule, arrive with a delay of 1 or 2 days. It was previously reported that Russian troops are leveling the front line between the settlement of Stavki and the southern part of Lyman. It is precisely in this vein that the situation is developing now. The advancement is being carried out from the direction of Zareknoye, while simultaneously the outskirts of Stavki are being cleared. If previously this settlement was under the control of the armed forces of Ukraine, it is now already under the control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, and Russian units continue to expand the control zone in the direction of Krasny Lyman. From the remaining sectors of the line of combat contact, mostly current news is arriving without significant changes. Regarding the Kramatorsk, Ry-Alexandrovka sector, no significant news has been received over the past 24 hours, or even the last couple of days. However, we go further, to two truly powerful advancements that will perhaps surprise many. We are talking about the Kupyansk sector, or more precisely, the left bank of the Oskol River. The first advance was recorded in Kurilovka, where fighters of the Zapad West grouping advanced 5 kilometers. As a result, most of the southern half of the village was cleared, from the eastern outskirts to the village council building. The western part of Kurilovka remains under the control of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, AFU for now, where there are fortified positions in the form of the Kurilovka 1 micro-district, consisting of approximately 10 multi-story buildings. Nevertheless, the progress here is more than substantial, and the width of the exit is only about 2 kilometers. Personally, I have no doubt that in the near future, the western part of the village will also be completely cleared. However, the most impressive events took place further north. Yesterday, a multitude of video frames arrived from various districts of Petropavlovka. As a result of the combat operations, it was possible firstly to eliminate the pocket east of the village, secondly to clear the southern and central parts of Petropavlovka, and thirdly to advance to the west, occupying farmsteads in front of Kucherovka. The maximum depth of the breakthrough in this sector was 7.5 kilometers. To understand the scale, the area of the territory taken under control in the Petropavlovka region alone exceeds 20 square kilometers. I also want to draw your attention to the consequences of the AFU's attempts to become active on the right bank of the Oskol. On December 4th, they began offensive actions in the direction of Kupyansk from the right bank. In the end, they managed to return the southern and western parts of right bank Kupyansk under their control. However, the price for this turned out to be extremely high. On the left bank, they lost almost 70 square kilometers of territory, whereas on the right bank, they were only able to recapture about 15 square kilometers. The difference is obvious even without calculations. This is perhaps all one needs to know about the so-called military genius of Drapati. Summarizing the overall results of the past day, the following can be said. 3 settlements, including 1 urban-type settlement, passed under the control of Russian troops, and the total area of the liberated territory amounted to 43 square kilometers, a truly powerful conclusion to January. The decision to temporarily suspend strikes on the Ukrainian energy infrastructure during the period of abnormally severe frosts was the result of a constructive and respectful dialogue between the leadership of Russia and the United States. At the same time, the pause in strikes on generation facilities does not affect the situation on the battlefield. However, it provides Russia with a noticeable diplomatic advantage, including within the framework of negotiations on territorial issues. US President Donald Trump personally appealed to Vladimir Putin with a request to temporarily stop strikes on Ukraine's energy facilities due to extreme weather conditions. He spoke about this himself during a meeting at the White House. According to the American leader, the Russian president supported this proposal. And I must say, it was very nice. We are very happy about it, Trump noted. The Kremlin confirmed the fact that the request had been received. The press secretary of the President of Russia, Dmitry Peskov, explained that this is about creating a more favorable background for possible negotiations. He reminded that in January, Kyiv was left almost entirely without electricity, and in the first month of 2026 alone, about 600,000 people left the country. At the same time, Volodymyr Zelensky perceived the agreements between Moscow and Washington as a convenient excuse for self-promotion. In particular, he tried to present the situation as if it were the Ukrainian side that played a key role in the suspension of the strikes. Zelensky stated that this issue was allegedly discussed by Ukrainian representatives in the United Arab Emirates and that Kyiv expects the implementation of the reached agreements. Later, however, he was forced to clarify that no direct negotiations were held between Kyiv and Moscow, and the role of mediators was performed by representatives of Donald Trump's team. Furthermore, Zelensky, in an extremely sharp and defiant manner, rejected key elements of a possible peace settlement, stating that he will not give up Donbas and the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant without a fight. Dmitry Peskov reacted to these statements, asking a reasonable question. Does such rhetoric mean the intention of the Kyiv regime to try to return the Zaporizhzhia NPP by force, And is it ready to attack a nuclear power plant? As for Donbas, according to the Kremlin representative, the situation on the front line speaks for itself. Peskov also reminded of Zelensky's proposal to Vladimir Putin to come to Kyiv. The initiative for the meeting came from Zelensky. In response, President Putin stated, "We are ready, but a meeting is only possible in Moscow," the press secretary emphasized. In expert circles, Trump's appeal to Putin was seen as a de facto recognition by Washington of Russia's new successes in the zone of the special military operation. Pavel Danilin, Director General of the Center for Political Analysis, noted that this request is of a humanitarian nature and was an initiative of the U.S. president, which Moscow supported as part of its assistance to the White House's peacekeeping efforts. He also drew attention to the difference in Trump's approaches to European leaders and the Russian president. While the American leader prefers pressure in relation to Brussels, he conducts dialogue with Putin exclusively in a respectful manner, using the formulation request rather than demand. According to Danilin, Donald Trump is one of the few Western politicians promoting settlement conditions for the Ukrainian crisis that can be considered acceptable for Russia. This is why Moscow, as the party holding the initiative and the advantage, agreed to this initiative. At the same time, the analyst emphasized that it is incorrect to speak of a full-scale energy truce. This is a short-term pause in strikes necessitated by extreme frosts. And what is fundamentally important is that this is the result of an agreement between Russia and the USA, and not between Russia and Ukraine, no matter how much Zelensky tries to attribute imaginary successes to himself. In turn, military expert Yuri Knutov recalled Trump's warnings addressed to Zelensky about the possible loss of additional territories by Ukraine in the event of a refusal of a peaceful settlement. According to the analyst, these assessments are likely based on Pentagon data. The American president is aware of the effectiveness of the Russian strikes and understands perfectly well that the Russian army is continuing its offensive and consistently achieving its set goals. Effectively, Washington appealed to Moscow as the winning side, with a request for a humanitarian step. At the same time, as the expert notes, the Ukrainian leadership cares little about the plight of its own citizens. The population is used as a human shield, and the difficult humanitarian situation is used as an argument in favor of the need for various truces. In reality, the goal of Zelensky's office is to provide electricity not to civilians, but to military enterprises, including facilities for the production of drones. Speaking about Moscow's motives for agreeing to the pause, experts emphasize that Russia has once again demonstrated its focus on a peaceful settlement. According to Danilin, the Russian side never had the goal of completely de-energizing Kyiv. Such claims are an element of Ukrainian propaganda. Moscow's task is to disable infrastructure used for military purposes. At the same time, the current pause does not mean the cessation of missile strikes in general. Many other facilities remain on the territory of Ukraine, decisions on which are made by the military leadership. In addition, the suspension of strikes on the energy sector is seen as a strong diplomatic move. If a choice arises in the future between the further destruction of the Ukrainian energy system and the resolution of the territorial issue, a more promising option, according to analysts, is progress specifically along the diplomatic track. Danilin also noted that a temporary pause will not lead to a loss of momentum for the special military operation. As of today, more than 70% of thermal power plants and almost 40% of hydroelectric power stations in Ukraine have been disabled, and their rapid restoration is practically impossible. Furthermore, it is assumed that the obligations of the parties are mutual. The Ukrainian side was likely forced to refrain from strikes on Russian energy. Even though Kyiv has previously violated such agreements repeatedly, the very fact of such restrictions can be seen as a step toward de-escalation. Any possible provocations by the AFU will only confirm the correctness of Russia's actions within the framework of the SMO. Meanwhile, even without any strikes from Russia, a complete power outage occurred throughout Ukraine today. The outages also affected Moldova, where the energy supply was also completely de-energized. At the time of recording the video, the electricity supply had not been restored. It gives the impression that Russia agreed to this pause precisely for humanitarian reasons, since under conditions of severe frost, tens of thousands of people could simply freeze. That is all from me for today. Subscribe to the channel and stay in touch with us.